Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. Welcome, everyone. We have a lot of people registered for today, so I'm just going to give it a minute or so to let everyone come into the room from the waiting room, and then we'll get started. In the meantime, you can enjoy some cold and flu humor. Okay, the numbers are still climbing, but there's a lot of information to cover over the next 45 minutes or so with the chance for questions afterwards. So let's get going. Today's webinar is brought to you by Natural Factors, and we're going to be talking about protection, relief, and recovery, how to build resilience against wintertime illnesses, because it's back. You have probably heard the common cold is making a comeback, whether we like it or not. And what can we do to be prepared for that? Before I get started, just because I'm talking about immune health, I want to say that there is no approved product to prevent, treat, or cure COVID-19, and Health Canada would like you to know that the information in this presentation is not intended to imply any such treatment. All right, a few words about myself before we get started. I am a naturopathic doctor, Kate Rhéaume. I am a graduate and former faculty member of the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine. I'm the author of this best-selling book, Vitamin K2 and the Calcium Paradox, How a Little-Known Vitamin Could Save Your Life. I am a busy working mom of 2 boys, among many other things, and an educator with Natural Factors, which is what brings me here today to talk about a topic that is still on people's minds after the last couple of years, and as we go into yet another cold and flu season, which may be a good old-fashioned cold and flu season. Well, maybe not good, but old-fashioned, in that we are hearing that the common cold is making a comeback. So I'm going to talk about understanding a little bit about our immune system and what we can do to make it work better. If you have questions, feel free to type them into the chat area as we go along. I will answer those at the end of the presentation. I'm trying to aim for about 45 to 50 minutes worth of information to share with you, and then 10 to 15 minutes for questions afterwards. Also keep in mind there'll be poll questions as we go along. Keep your eye out for those. And I am covering a little bit more information than I normally would in this sort of time frame. So don't be worried if you can't write it all down. There will be a handout that you can download at the end of this presentation, as well. A copy of that and the presentation itself of the recording will be emailed out tomorrow to anybody who has registered. I will be covering a few more immune health products as well than I normally do. Not that you have to have every single one of them in your natural health medicine cabinet, but just to know that they exist. There's lots of great solutions, immune health solutions. So we're all worried about whether or not we're going to get really sick with something, right? If it's a cold, are we going to be a bad one? If you get the flu, is it going to be a bad one? Is it going to be a serious illness or not? So let's look at what determines serious illness. There are 3 main factors that play into what determines a serious illness. First of all, the nature of the pathogen that's affecting you. Most wintertime illnesses are caused by viruses. There's 1 or 2 minor exceptions to those. Mostly we're going to be talking about viruses here. Cold versus flu viruses, for example, produce quite different types of illness. And I'll focus in a little, explain more about that. So the nature of the virus itself does play a role in the kind of symptoms it will produce and how sick you will get. But that is by no means not the only determining factor in how sick we may get when we're exposed to a particular bug. Our initial exposure to a virus, our initial viral load, makes a difference. So for example, if somebody is sick with something, they cough or sneeze on their hand, they touch a doorknob, you touch that doorknob, then you touch your face, you may get enough virus particles in through your mouth or nose or eyes, just enough for you to be infected. But the initial viral load that you're exposed to allows your immune system to mount a defense against it and kind of get on top of it, so you don't get quite so sick. Versus somebody who is sick and coughing and sneezing in your face and you're inhaling it, as mothers of toddlers know so well, you can be infected then with quite a large viral load, and that's harder for your immune system to get a handle on it. So this is why things like distancing and hand washing and masks and whatnot will lower your initial amount of virions or virus particles that you're exposed to. And thirdly, and most importantly, and what we're going to focus on today, is the health of the person being infected. The existence of so-called pre-existing conditions, an individual's age can play into their immune health, but that doesn't necessarily mean that as you get older, your immune health needs to decline. There's things we can do to counteract that, as well as your general health. So there's a poll question running now. Feel free to weigh in as to whether you think your immune system is as strong as it should or could be. I imagine that if you're attending a webinar like this, your answer might be no. It looks like the majority or most people are saying no, about 2/3 no, 1/3 yes. So let's see what we can do to understand our immune systems a little better and what we can do to make them work better. First, let's talk about the things that make us sick, understanding those a little better. This is the Know Thy Enemy portion of the presentation. Let's first talk about the common cold, because as I said, you've probably heard it's making a comeback. So people are getting sick, and it turning out to be the common cold. It's an especially inconvenient time to have any kind of illness right now, of course. There are over 200 different viruses known to cause the common cold. And so that means that we will not develop immunity to the common cold through exposure. This is why nobody tries to make a shot against the common cold. You can't put 200 different viruses into a shot. It doesn't work like that. And potentially, if your immune health isn't strong, you could get sick with one thing after another because it's different bugs that are coming at you. In the US, there are 1 billion colds per year. I didn't use a Canadian statistic, which is a little bit less than that, but that's just such an impressive number. Children, especially children under the age of about 6 or 7, do tend to get sick more often. That's very common. 6 to 8 colds per year. Fortunately, that will resolve around grade 1. Their immune systems change and they become less sick, less often. And adults have 2 to 4 colds per year, or we used to. Typically, that would be very common. That, with the hand washing and distancing, of course, have gone down in the last couple of years. We don't want it to come back. The other big category of virus that makes us sick in the wintertime is flu viruses. So there are less, at any given time, there are fewer flu viruses in circulation, usually about a handful of these, maybe 5, 6, 7, depending on the year. So less of these, but they tend to make us more ill. Flu viruses produce a more severe illness. At any given year, prior to 2020, 10 to 25% of Canadians would get the flu annually. So that is, hundreds of thousands to millions of people who might get the flu in any given year. And 4,000 to 8,000 Canadians would die from complications of the flu. This was typically people who were quite immunocompromised, the very old or the very young, or people with severely compromised immune systems, for example, would be vulnerable to death from the flu. That is something that can happen. So like I said, these two big categories of viruses produce different types of symptoms. And if you don't have the flu anytime you ever get anything, sometimes it's my pet peeve that people say, oh, I have the flu no matter, even if they've just got the sniffles, they're quite different. So a cold will typically be a milder illness. You can have bad colds, but they're typically a milder illness. There's rarely a fever or extreme one. There are rarely headaches. or body aches and pains. Fatigue and weakness may be there, but it's mild. Extreme exhaustion is not considered to be a feature of the common cold, whereas you've got all these head and neck symptoms that we know so well, right? Stuffy nose, sneezing, sore throat. Cough may happen, mild to moderate. That can be common, or it can linger after. We'll talk about that later. The flu, on the other hand, typically more serious illness, classically presents with a high fever, prominent headache, severe body aches as usual, extreme fatigue or exhaustion can even go on for weeks. And those upper head and neck symptoms, like the stuffy nose and whatnot, may or may not be there, or they're mild. Cough is common and frequently will become severe with the flu. So that's sort of a little bit sort of how you can identify to yourself if what you've got is a cold or a flu. Now, let us take a sort of a brief look at the immune system. So what protects us from these infections? And then I'm going to take a bit of a deeper dive momentarily, but there's like a few barriers that we have that protect us from these infections. First of all, there are physical barriers. So epithelial tissue, there is a thin layer of tissue that lines our nose, mouth, throat, eyes, lungs. And if you breathe something in, for example, that virus has to penetrate through that barrier to get into our bloodstream to circulate in the body. If the virus happens to get past that initial barrier, it will meet a set of white blood cells. There's two different sets of white blood cells involved in this aspect of our immune function. First are the non-specific white blood cells. So remember I said there's 200 different cold viruses. We can't develop immunity to those through exposure and then developing antibodies for, that it's a familiar exposure. We have this first line of defense called the innate immune system, non-specific, and it acts against any incoming virus, bacteria, fungus to stop those, whether we've been exposed to them before or not. Then there's the adaptive immune response. There's different types of cells, some of which produce antibodies, and those will help recover from an infection and provide a certain amount of protection from us getting sick if we're exposed to that bug again in the future. For some, as you know, classic infections, and a single exposure like the chicken pox, you develop antibodies. Typically, there are exceptions, but you develop antibodies and you never get the chicken pox again in your life. For others, that immunity only lasts a few months or maybe years. You could potentially get sick again, but much milder illness or not sick at all because of the antibodies you have hanging around. So now that you have this sort of broad overview of what makes us sick and what protects us from getting sick, I'm going to give you some steps to help so you know what things you can do to help your immune system be more efficient and effective. So this is prevention. So by the way, I think about prevention as, what we can do on an everyday basis year round, but maybe more so in the winter time, to make sure our immune system is working as well as possible. So this would be like foundations of immune health. So a lot of common sense things. I won't spend too much time here because we've heard a lot about it in the last year and a half. And I think that most people are aware, for example, of a lot of these tips. The hand is quicker than the sneeze. Wash them often. We're all washing our hands more often. But public service announcement, remember to do it for long enough. The singing, whatever it is, the alphabet song or whatever you need to sing to keep washing for that 20 seconds really makes a big difference. Viruses are little packets of protein packets. So soap doesn't just wash them off our hands, but it bursts them and destroys them. And so if you need to think about that as you're washing to keep you going for 20 seconds, it makes a big difference versus the usual average washing time is 6 seconds or something really short. Practice healthy eating habits. That's a common sense thing, but specifically avoiding sugar. White sugar, refined sugar, will depress the number and activity of the white blood cells that are supposed to make us protect us against these viruses. Just the amount of sugar in a can of pop, for example, will slow down that immune response and make those white blood cells less effective for 6 hours. And so if you're eating sugar all day, you're just depressing your immune function all day. This is an obvious one, but I have to mention it. Quit smoking and or vaping. They're not good for your lung health. That will make your lungs more susceptible to infection. Plus, you're going to get more sick and have a longer recovery afterwards if your lung function is poor. It's just common sense. Getting enough sleep. Sleep's really important for the action of our immune system, specifically being in bed by 11 o'clock. Now, this sounds overly prescriptive, but like every other aspect of our immune system, and our health, to be honest, works on a circadian rhythm. So some aspects of our biological functions are more active at some times of day than others. And it turns out that the white blood cells decrease their activity a little bit at nighttime around 11 o'clock, which means that if you're up at that time, then you may have an increased risk of becoming infected because your immune system just takes a little break. Doesn't work the night shift quite as hard. And so just be aware of that. Exercise is important to maintain a healthy immune system. You hear not too much. Now, most people are not at risk of exercising too much, but what I mean by too much exercise is people who are training for marathons, triathlons, Ironman and woman, and these kinds of long distance intense events. Actually, those kinds of things, the incidence of upper respiratory tract infection has been shown to increase with the number of miles run for marathoners, for example. And so if you want to train for a marathon, you need a lot more support for your immune health. But the rest of us, a little bit of exercise, getting out in the fresh air, getting moving is a good thing for the immune system. Keep your stress in check. Stress will depress your immune activity very quickly. And finally, key immune support nutrients. And this is where we're going to focus in on because I'm a naturopathic doctor, nutrition is important. And I think that this is something that people either aren't aware of or maybe don't understand the true impact that this can make. So we're going to look closely. I said we're going to look a little bit more closely at the immune function. I don't want anybody's eyes glazing over. There will not be a test on this. And remember, there will be a handout to download with a summary of what I'm saying, so don't worry too much about taking notes. But on the left-hand side of the diagram is a sort of a closer or schematic look at the elements of our innate immune system. That's that first line of defense against all the different viruses that can be coming in. First of all, there's the epithelial barrier that I mentioned, that this is this layer of cells here. And again, that lines the eyes, nose, throat, mouth, lungs. These cells should be stuck well together and have a basement membrane underneath them. The microbes need to pass between these cells and then through that basement membrane. And so there's things we can do to make the cells stick together, to strengthen the basement membrane, to encourage the chemicals that can be secreted through that membrane, the antiviral chemicals, to come out more. And I'll talk about that. And then if they manage to get through that barrier, they will meet a number of white blood cells whose job it is to destroy them. And so here are some of the characters that are found. The neutrophils will help to neutralize incoming pathogens. The macrophages, in fact, this diagram shows all of these cells being the same size. The macrophages are in fact much larger. Macro means large. Phage means to eat. These are the big eaters. That's a big mouth there. This guy will come in and eat up. And if you ever want to Google this for fun, you will watch them. You can see videos of these guys hunting pathogens. They are predators in your bloodstream. Natural killer cell, the name says it all. They will come in and kill things. And then there's these dendritic cells with the long arms. What these will do is once these other cells have killed and broken up some viruses, for example, the dendrites will take a piece of the virus on its long arm and carry it over here to the right side of the screen to these guys and show it to them and say, here, make an antibody against this. And so they will take that and start making antibodies. So this is the adaptive immune response. It's more specific. It kicks in, 12 hours or more into our immune reaction. The body will start making antibodies to help us get over an infection. You're talking or a day or two in. And again, those antibodies will help prevent further reinfection, but also really important part of the recovery process. So What's important here is that all of these cells require certain nutrients to do their job properly. Our nutrition makes a major impact on how these things function. And if certain nutrients are not in abundance in our diet, these cells simply can't work as well as they should. So, for example, vitamin C is important for the connective tissue, for collagen formation, and that means that collagen is part of this basement membrane, so makes that membrane stronger, harder for bugs to get through it. Vitamin A helps to work for a number of aspects of the health as well of that layer. And then vitamin D and zinc and C, really everything on this side, plays a major role in the action and function of all of these cells of the innate immune system, as well as the adaptive immune system. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. Zinc is another nutrient. So if you've heard that things like vitamin C and D and zinc are immune supportive nutrients, this is why. They specifically work and act and help these cells do their jobs more efficiently. And when those nutrients are missing, these cells just can't protect us as well as they should. Other nutrients you may not be as familiar with, quercetin plays a role here. Echinacea isn't a nutrient, it's a botanical medicine, but it also will help these cells work more efficiently, increasing their number and activity. So I'll get into a little bit more details on those. All right, so let's start with vitamin D. I will just, keep this brief because I think hopefully we've heard a lot about the importance of vitamin D for immune health over the last year and a half. But specifically, there are vitamin D receptors right on those immune cells, which speaks to its importance for their function. And the immune cells can convert vitamin D to its active form, which also says how important that nutrient is for their function. Vitamin D deficiency is common, and in Canada in the wintertime especially, we know, and vitamin D deficiency absolutely increases the risk of wintertime infection. For people who are deficient in vitamin D, getting your vitamin D levels up to a normal level will cut wintertime illness by half. It's just a no-brainer. So there are lots of different options in terms of vitamin D. This is one nutrient that, as we know, it's a sunshine vitamin. We are not getting this in the wintertime from the sun, and not very many food sources of vitamin D. You'll find a really small amount in egg yolks, in certain deep cold water fish, of course, fortified. There's a lot of fortified vitamin D foods, fortified dairy products, for example, but that's really no different than taking a supplement. You're just supplements already in your food. And so it's really hard to beat a vitamin D supplement in the wintertime in terms of a foundation of immune health. I'm showing lots of different examples here to show that there are liquid forms, there are chewable forms, there are kids forms, adults forms. Health Canada has recently increased the upper daily limit in terms of, what's available in supplements to 2,500 international units per day from 1,000. That's new in the last few weeks. As well, vitamin D is normally sourced from lanolin. It's a byproduct of wool making. No sheep are killed to produce vitamin D, but it's not considered to be a vegan ingredient. However, vitamin D3, the preferred form of vitamin D, can be sourced from lichen, so this is a plant-based, for people who are following, for example, a plant-based or vegan diet, then there are vegan vitamin D3s, and it's really something helpful for everybody to be on generally in the wintertime. Oh, wait, so let us move along. Oh, here we go. As I was going to say, this is new. Health Canada has increased the limit for vitamin D products 2,500 IU. So the one single most common question we get asked about vitamin D is, how much should I take? And the fact is, it's impossible to tell without a blood test. Some people take 1,000 IUs per day, eventually get their blood work done, and it's fine. Some people are still low with that or more. It is a kind of unpredictable, actually, with vitamin D, how much you get, or sort of how high your blood levels will go when you're taking a supplement. So you don't have to rush out and get your vitamin D levels checked before you take vitamin D, but at some point, it's a nice thing to have. If you're going for a checkup, ask your doctor for a vitamin D test to see where you're at. You may have to pay out of pocket for that. It's not covered necessarily by provincial healthcare plans, it's usually around $40, but it's a worthwhile thing to know. And why might you take the 2,500 IU? Well, if you have been shown to be low or deficient in vitamin D, you're living in a northern latitude where you're not getting a lot of vitamin D, or when you think you're coming down with something, I will reach to this 2,500 IU and take that, a couple of those sometimes for a few days if I think I'm at risk of getting sick. But on a daily basis, for most people, 1,000 IUs is probably a good idea, but you just have to get eventually at some point a vitamin D test to see if you're in an optimal range. Vitamin C, as I mentioned, plays a major role in immunity by strengthening that connective tissue layer that we find. It will increase natural killer cell activity. It increases the production of natural antiviral compounds from some of those cells. I told you some of the things that they do is they secrete compounds that will, go and kill viruses. Vitamin C helps them do that. It increases our antibody response and level, so that will help you get over an infection faster and prevent reinfection. It also helps to recycle something called quercetin, which I'm going to talk about next. Quercetin and vitamin C are found together in many of the same types of foods. So I do like to top up on vitamin C in the wintertime, at least, for all of the benefits it has, helping with collagen formation and immune health, for example. And again, there's lots of different options when it comes to vitamin C. Here is one for people that find that vitamin C is hard on their stomach, because it is acid, right? Ascorbic acid, and that acidic nature of it can be hard for people on their stomach. So taking a buffered form of vitamin C, the vitamin C has been neutralized, so it's not acidic, gentle on the stomach. So Bio C Gel is an example of a buffered vitamin C that is in a soft gel format. It also comes with bioflavonoids, which are found when you look back here, when you see an orange or citrus fruit, the vitamin C is in the orange part, and the bioflavonoids are found in the white pithy portion. Don't peel that off too much. I mean, you have to peel your orange, but don't pick every little bit of the white stuff off, because that's where your bioflavonoids are. And so adding that to a vitamin C supplement is a way to enhance the action of the vitamin C. Okay, so moving on to quercetin. This is our last nutrient that I'll mention as a sort of basic kind of daily, if at least a wintertime daily, if not a year-round daily nutrient to try to get in more to your diet or consider supplementing is quercetin. This is a bioflavonoid. I already mentioned those briefly. It's a vitamin-like molecule found in small amounts in quite a wide range of plant foods. The highest known food in quercetin is caper berries down here at the right. Here's the small ones. You can get large ones as well. But you'll also find this in green leafy herbs, things like sorrel, dock, cilantro, as well as onions, apples, red onions in particular, but a wide variety of fruits and vegetables. And in fact, quercetin and the high quercetin intake may be one of the key benefits of the Mediterranean diet. It's not just the olive oil and red wine, but the quercetin, because it's a blood vessel protectant, and so it is really important for cardiovascular health. Now, in the last year and a half or so, there have been more, here's a few headlines from journals. You don't have to read every single bit here, but just to show you some snapshots from some journal headlines looking at interest in quercetin around its potential role in immune health. And I think that there's a lot of interesting research. Some of it was coming out of Michel Chrétien's lab in Montreal back in March of 2020, for example, looking at quercetin's role in immune health and helping to protect us against viruses. So something interesting to be aware of. It takes a little bit of effort, but with some effort, you can get more of that into your diet through eating things like capers and red onions and green leafy herbs. But if you're concerned about immune health and blood vessel health, cardiovascular, heart health, circulatory health, then you might want to consider a quercetin supplement. Quercetin is a molecule that is moderately well absorbed on its own, in a typical supplement, but it really does benefit from some enhancement. In other words, You can take the quercetin and mix it with ingredients that helps to enhance its absorption. So here's an example, quercetin lipomycel matrix. It mixes quercetin with ingredients that causes it, once the capsule opens in your stomach, to form tiny little droplets with the quercetin inside, and that increases absorption up to 10 times. And so it's a nice option for people who are choosing to take a quercetin supplement to make sure that you are absorbing it. So this is something that's typically taken, say, 1 capsule per day in the wintertime. Okay, so this is, so that was the protection. So nutrients that we need all year round, if not especially in the winter time, to keep our immune system as strong as possible. Now, that was prevention. So now here's protection. So if you think you're getting a little tickle in your throat, or for example, my son came in yesterday and said his girlfriend has a bad cold, she's quite sick in bed, and so I'm like, great, now we got to top him up, we got to top me up, top his brother up, we got to get on this to make sure that if we've been exposed to something, we can step up our immune system's action. So there are a few more nutrients that, while they are absolutely important on a daily basis, I especially think about them or turn to them, have a little bit extra when I think that we are at risk perhaps of getting sick, or we've been exposed to something, or somebody's got a tickle in their throat. And the first one is zinc. Zinc plays several roles in the immune function. It will help support white blood cell production. It is a cofactor for something called thymulin. This is a hormone produced by the thymus gland. You can see a glowing thymus gland in this fellow on the bottom here. The thymus gland is a rather large organ when we're young, but it gradually shrinks as we get older. And if we are deficient in zinc, the thymus can't do its job in producing T cells, which are cells that are part of the adaptive immune response that help with, for example, antibody production and that later stage of immune function. So really important. Zinc is a really important nutrient for immune function. It also helps with wound healing. If you feel like your wounds are healing slower than they should, they're taking a long time, try zinc and vitamin C for starters. Those are 2 important nutrients for wound healing. And so this is something that has been shown, zinc, when taken at the first signs of a cold, to increase the rate of healing, or rather shorten the duration of cold. It can shave several days. Oh, I didn't put my graph in here. I had a cool graph where it shows people taking zinc lozenge versus regular zinc. And, you know, the typical average cold duration is like 7 to 10 days. And with the zinc lozenges, being able to shave 2 to 3 or 4, even 4 days off of that process, which is, it's nice. Why a lozenge? Zinc is not especially well absorbed from the intestines. In fact, the body has a limit on the amount of zinc it will absorb. You can get past that when you think you're getting sick and you want to top up your zinc by having a lozenge that dissolves in your mouth. The zinc goes directly into your bloodstream, so under the tongue, right into the blood vessels, and then you can increase your zinc intake. So Natural Factors has recently introduced a new, reformulated zinc lozenge with echinacea, elderberry, and vitamin C. Comes in 2 flavors, a cherry and a honey blossom. And this is a combination of 10 milligrams of zinc gluconate, 25 milligrams of vitamin C, 30 milligrams of echinacea, 125 milligrams of black elderberry, which we'll talk about. And you would dissolve this, if you think you're coming down with something, dissolve 1 under the tongue 3 times per day, or as directed by a healthcare practitioner. I know somebody will take these hourly or more. I wouldn't take it much more than that, but if it's just for a day or 2, it's not a concern. However, this is it's a convenient way to get zinc levels up. Be aware that zinc on an empty stomach can cause upset stomach. So I would try to take this after a meal because otherwise you can zinc is known for upsetting stomach if you're taking it when you're on an empty stomach. But great convenient way to get your zinc levels up. Okay, next thing to either, this is arguably something you might want to have on hand in your natural medicine cabinet, or at least be aware of for when you get that tickle in your throat, when you feel like people around you are starting to get sick, is echinacea. And one of the most common questions I get asked is, does echinacea really work? And that's because a couple of widely publicized studies on echinacea concluded that it didn't work. And those studies all use dried echinacea. And when you dry echinacea, you destroy its active ingredients. So dried echinacea does not work. Dried echinacea, for example, in a tea or a powder in a capsule, it will do you no good. And however, if you get fresh extracted echinacea, so the echinacea is not allowed to dry, it's harvested and then liquid extracted right away, then you have an effective echinacea product. It also needs to be standardized to the active ingredients in the echinacea plant. But this exists, and these have really good studies behind them, and absolutely something that works, and it's something I will turn to and be a go-to in what if I think that we might be coming down with something. So Echinamide is the brand name for a fresh extracted echinacea purpurea. This is hand harvested at the peak of activity, actually 3 separate harvests for 3 separate active ingredients. This is certified organic, grown in the Okanagan Valley of British Columbia. Here's a picture of the fields here. And each batch is rigorously tested to ensure purity, potency, and standardized to provide the 3 active ingredients that have specific roles in immune function. And this is available in a few different forms: liquids, soft gels, which has a liquid inside, and it's a great thing to have on hand when you are battling that tickle in your throat. So how Echinamide works, just briefly, it will, as I said, the 3 different active ingredients will increase the number and activity of white blood cells by around 15%. It will help increase their action, their ability to secrete antiviral compounds, for example. So antiviral is the name of a combination that includes this echinamide, echinacea extract, as well as other herbs, lomatium, astragalus, reishi mushroom. Those have all been shown to support immune health. And like I said, this comes in a liquid or soft gels that have a liquid inside. The soft gels, of course, are convenient for travel, not if anybody's traveling anywhere. The liquid not as convenient for travel, but I think the liquid is nice because you put it in a little bit of water, you gargle and swallow, and you get a certain amount of topical action. Because when you have that tickle in your throat, that is a virus that is stuck to the back of your throat that is secreting a chemical to break down your epithelial tissue and gain access to your bloodstream. So by the time you feel that tickle in your throat, that virus has probably already been eating away at you for about 24 hours at least. So want to get on that. Now, a good quality echinacea will literally make your tongue tingle and buzz. Not everybody likes that. Kids don't like that always. So that's where the soft gels come in. Okay, now relief. So what happens if we happen to get sick? We haven't caught it quite as fast as we'd like to. We've got young children picking things up at daycare and they're sharing. What do we do? So again, you might not be sick right now listening to this webinar, hopefully not, but just to be aware, there are certain wonderful and very helpful natural solutions to help relieve symptoms and support your immune system in its job in recovering and helping you get better faster. So first of all here, bone broth. This is an old-fashioned remedy that I can't think of anything better. When my son told me yesterday that his girlfriend was sick, I rushed out to the store to pick up some chicken bones and to make sure I put a pot of broth on the stove. He's fine now. So far, knock on wood, we are still healthy, so I haven't needed it yet, but it's a great thing to have on hand. And studies have shown that chicken broth, good old-fashioned chicken soup, will relieve symptoms, help clear congestion, thin and clear congestion and mucus better than hot water, tea, or other things that it's been studied against. Even canned chicken soup, and the studies have shown to be better than those things, but of course homemade is best. So if you've never made it, looks like we're about, oh, 2/3, 1/3, 2/3 people have made it. 1/3 have not yet tried this. There's a trend towards this for a variety of health benefits. Any classic cookbook like, The Art of French Cooking or The Joy of Cooking will have this literally first chapter. It's foundational cooking. And it's fun and delicious to make your own bone broth. So absolutely check it out. And it looks like more people have than not, but we've got quite a few people online, and maybe 1/3 of people haven't tried to make bone broth yet. So something to consider. Absolutely, I try to keep this on hand in the wintertime just in case somebody is feeling under the weather. Okay, next, after bone broth, what can we do? Now, this is something that can be taken preventatively, again, when you got that tickle in your throat. Or even before you get the tickle in your throat, if you're going to be traveling or in an area where you're exposed to, more exposed to viruses or other people, is black elderberry. But it's also something that can be taken to relieve symptoms of cold and flu. Black elderberry has a long history of traditional use in Europe to help support immune health, to help relieve symptoms of cold and flu, such as cough, fever, catarrh, means runny, drippy nose, up the upper respiratory tract, helping to soothe the throat. This has been studied in children aged 10 and up, so a nice option for kids. I've been actually giving this to my son lately because, kids are back in school, so I want to keep him healthy. And it's a combination of micronutrients coming from this black elderberry plant that has a lot of research behind it in terms of its ability to help keep people healthy and relieve symptoms if they get sick. Be aware that at this time of year, you may find black elderberries and or homemade black elderberry syrup at farmers markets. Be cautious about these products or making your own because the seed of the black elderberry does contain poisonous compounds, and you don't want to have that in your syrup or your any preparation you're making by yourself. This is why I tend to go with a preparation like the Natural Factors, the pre-done, and it's tested to make sure those compounds from the seeds have not made their way into the final product. So just be aware of that. If you grow your own black elderberries, for example, get the seeds out before you do anything with them. So yeah, love black elderberry. It is a wonderful, time-tested option in terms of immune support and immune health. What about if you get a cough? There are wonderful, effective, natural cough syrup options. This is absolutely something to keep on hand and have on hand, because what is it about coughs that make them start in the middle of the night? I don't know, but you don't want to be caught without some good cough syrup on hand, especially with kids. They start in the middle of the night. Most cough syrups are not suitable for children under 12, but this one is. This one has no contraindications, has no heavy medication that can cause excessive drowsiness in children, for example. The Natural Factors Echinacea cough and cold syrup is a fast-acting healing herbal formula in a base of honey, which has its own anti-cough properties. It's a blend of herbs that effectively suppress the urge to cough, relief for sore throats, help to relieve strained throats and vocal cords for public speakers and singers, helps to restore breathing by controlling excess phlegm. You can take it by the spoonful as you would cough syrup as needed, or you can put a little bit of it in some hot water and sip that, wonderfully decongesting, and a great option to have on hand. I find when it comes to coughs can be stubborn, and different coughs respond to different remedies. This is typically my top go-to that almost always relieves a cough. Every now and then you get some kind of weird cough that you may need to add in other things, but between this and the black elderberry, you typically have a great cough relief system. And then one more thing I'll mention to be aware of for sinus congestion, sinusitis, inflammation of the sinuses, is the horseradish respiratory relief. Anybody, this is from the Whole Earth and Sea line, anybody who is inadvertently taken a big mouthful of horseradish can attest to its sinus clearing properties. wonderful way to harness that. I mean, even just if you can manage a spoonful of horseradish with some honey and just spoon that down is a great decongesting cough, natural cough solution. Most people, may not be into that. So or can handle that. So the whole earth and sea pure food horseradish respiratory relief is enteric coated, also containing garlic rich. So very strong, but you're not going to, have to be tasting it or chewing it. It opens in the intestine, in the digestive tract, to get those benefits without having to suffer with the taste of these strong herbs like horseradish and garlic. The combination also contains vitamin C and echinamide. So this is something that helps relieve and open and clear sinuses, helps improve and clear breathing, so you're breathing easier, as well as immune supportive herbs and nutrients. So just be aware that that's there. And then finally, recovery. So you got sick, you're over it or mostly over it, but maybe you're still exhausted, or maybe you still have a lingering cough. There's nothing worse than the 100-day cough. That is, you got sick, you got over it, but the cough won't go away. That happens. And again, some viruses have that nature. The 100-day cough was something that was going around the year before, like 3 years ago, maybe. And sometimes that just happens. And sometimes there's, a lingering cough. So what can we do about that? So how do we get better faster? Well, eating clean, staying hydrated, be physically active to your capacity. Don't push it. If you are still feeling really tired, then rest. Rest is the best thing for you. But if you can get up and start walking around, typically that helps with, relieving phlegm and mucus. So you need to find a balancing act depending on your strength and health. Getting adequate sleep, really important. Getting back out and connecting with nature, practicing laughter, gratitude, and relaxation, studies have shown will help improve immune health, and consider some natural health product support. So what kinds of things can help us get over a lingering cold, for example? Well, if you have that annoying lingering post-viral cough, as it's called, then the lung, bronchial, and sinus health formula is a wonderful option. This is a combination of N-acetylcysteine, which is an amino acid to help thin mucus, and so it's easier to clear. Bromelain, anti-inflammatory amino acid, also will help with sinus inflammation. And then a number of anti-cough herbs like marshmallow, mullein, wild cherry bark, horehound, ivy, and really like this to help, clear that lingering cough. If you have a post-viral cough, it can absolutely be taken, in the recovery phase or the relief phase. If you feel like you're sick, you want to take something, by all means, but just keep this in mind if that comes up, or you see somebody with a post-viral cough. I was sick weeks ago and I still got this darn cough. Then think about this formula, because I have used this for many years for that purpose. And last but not least, for people who are still feeling exhausted and depleted after a cold, for example, or flu, then sometimes you are just exhausted, like you're stressed. It was a stress that your body went through that can be hard to get over. You need a combination of immune and adaptogen support. So adaptogens are herbs that help us recover from stress, and they help to restore our energy, our resilience, our well-being. And I really love the super immune combination. Now, this can be, again, taken preventatively or for energy and immune support at any time, but especially if you've been sick and you just feel like you're still dragging, haven't got your energy back, still depleted, then the whole earth and sea pure food super mushroom combination, wonderful to help support and reestablish healthy immune function and increase energy. This contains adaptogens that help with stress management. It is also made with farm fresh, organic, and sustainably grown non-GMO ingredients, suitable for vegans and vegetarians. It's a combination of organic mushrooms, Itake, shiitake, reishi, cordyceps, chaga, lion's mane, and something called well-immune beta-glucans. It's a mushroom component, as well as farm fresh factors, which is a whole food concentrate to provide phytonutrients that we might not be getting into our diet every day. So great thing to keep in mind if you find yourself depleted after being sick. And finally, in terms of once like whole health and reestablishing our health with recovery, when we have been sick, regardless of the type of illness, sometimes our microbiome gets thrown off. This is the balance of good and bad bacteria and plays a major role in our immune health. So try to reestablish the beneficial bacteria by eating more fermented foods, whether that's kombucha, sauerkraut, fermented dairy products, kefir, yogurt, but watch out for the sugar content for things like yogurt and kefir. Miso, sourdough bread, lots of wonderful fermented foods to help bring back some beneficial bacteria to the system. Okay, that's a bit of a summary sheet or a summary graph, but that's in the handout that you can, I believe, start downloading now. I also wanted to make a comment. You saw, products from different brands represented here. One thing they all have in common is this symbol you'll find on the label, Ashura. This is Canada's only independent, not-for-profit, third-party testing facility for natural health products to make sure they are non-GMO, as well as the mass spec here refers to a contaminants testing system that checks for over 700 different contaminants. And these go above and beyond Health Canada guidelines. You don't have to test for these, but if you can, why wouldn't you? So really important as well to authenticate ingredients in your products, because there's more and more counterfeit herbs on the market. So just in case, people ask, how do I know I'm getting a good natural health product? Well, Ashura symbol, look for that on the labels. Okay, so that brings us up to time, 50 minutes. And let's see what questions we have in the chat. We've got about 10 minutes for questions, while I don't know where my slide went, but that's okay. We've got 10 minutes for questions before we go, while you're downloading your handout. Okay, let me go back down to the bottom, because here's the questions. Okay. Question from Ruth: does maple sugar have the same negative effect as sugar? No, it doesn't. Any sweetener you have in excess is not a good thing, but in moderation, maple syrup and honey do not have the same negative effects on your health or immune system. That's what I tend to use. Question, okay, so same question from Roida. Manuka honey have the same negative effect as sugar? No, again, as far as sweeteners go, honey and maple syrup are good choices. Question from Kathy. Hi, Kathy. If an individual doesn't tolerate Echinacea well, what can be used instead? So black elderberry, wonderful alternative to Echinacea if somebody doesn't, for whatever reason, agree with Echinacea. Question from Joanne: what about magnesium? Well, I would talk about magnesium all day long, any chance I get, because I'm a gigantic magnesium fan. I won't say it doesn't play a role in immune health. It does. As a matter of fact, you need adequate magnesium levels in order to absorb and metabolize vitamin D. So if you're taking vitamin D, but your magnesium is deficient, your vitamin D won't be helping you as much. So that's what I'll say about magnesium. Question from Sharon: how do I find what my vitamin D levels are? Ask your family doctor. Like I said, you might have to pay for it. It's not expensive, but just ask your family doctor to put that on your next blood work, or just go in to ask for it. It may be some labs you can just go, I could be wrong about that, whether you can just go in and get it, or pick your family doctor or naturopathic doctor. Okay, question from Leanne. We have a client that insists on taking 10,000 IU of vitamin D per day because Naturopathic Doc from the USA podcast. Any advice on concerns? Okay. Yes. So there are people out there taking high doses of vitamin D. And, as with everything, we think if a little is good, then more is better. But that is almost never the case, in that more can be better to a certain point, and after a certain point, it's either not helpful or possibly harmful. And vitamin D is one of those things. I certainly wrote a lot about this with my book. So vitamin D, if you take it in too high amounts for too long, will cause you to absorb calcium without cessation, without stopping, and that can be problematic. And some so-called experts online are recommending very high doses. Like I've heard from people taking 50,000 IUs per day, and it doesn't end well. So for people who really insist on taking 10,000 IUs of vitamin D per day, make sure that they are taking equal amounts of vitamin A with it and some vitamin K2. That will stop problems associated with that high use. Is there a risk of too much vitamin D? Yes, as I mentioned, too much vitamin D on its own, excess calcium absorption, which is not a good thing. You can balance that out with some vitamin A. A and D will keep each other in check, but as well, vitamin K2 will also stop the inappropriate calcification that we see with vitamin D. Is there optimal range of vitamin D? Again, you know, like I said, you need to have your blood levels tested. It's hard to know how much you should be taking. What other supplements are safe for children besides vitamin C and D? As I mentioned, the black elderberry has been studied in kids. Zinc has been studied in children. Those are also all great options. And the quercetin, everything I mentioned is also safe for kids. What foods contain zinc? Oh, good question. I usually have that on my slide, and I don't know where I missed that picture. So zinc is found in meat and seafood. Oysters and things like that are very high. So meat, seafood, oyster, pork, not as much chicken, but there'll be some in there. And then you will find smaller or lesser amounts in things like beans, grains, and legumes. However, those can contain phytates, phytic acid, that bind zinc, so we can't absorb it as well unless they are soaked or sprouted first. But meat and seafood are great sources of zinc. I lose a lot of hand sanitizer. It's damaged my fingernails. Any suggestions to repair? That may be, if it's just a dehydration thing, it's sort of, you might have to get in the habit of sort of moisturizing or maybe rubbing some coconut oil into your nails after you sanitize. It's a bit of it, and you have greasy fingers, it's an extra step. But other than that, extra omega-3 essential fatty acids and or possibly a collagen supplement. But it's tough if it's, you know, the sanitizer can really be drying. Different with zinc citrate versus zinc bisglycinate absorption. So zinc bisglycinate tends to be very well absorbed, higher absorption with zinc bisglycinate, but in the lozenge form, you want the gluconate preferably, or citrate. They absorb better in the lozenge form. Christine, I missed the bone broth recipe. I didn't actually provide a recipe because there's lots of different recipes online that you can have. I was just showing a picture. Bone broth, making your own versus buying condensed bone broth. Do you still get the benefits from store-bought? Yeah, so the benefits have been shown even in canned chicken soup to be better. So they did studies where they compared hot water, tea, homemade like grandma's recipe chicken soup to canned chicken soup, and both of the chicken soups, whether it's homemade or canned, showed quite good ability to thin mucus and help relieve congestion. Any additional suggestions for a cancer patient with low neutrophils? That's something that is worth working with a practitioner on who's familiar with that, because that can be a tricky, can be because of the medications, a stubborn or resistant condition. But yeah, I would say to work with, you know, beyond what I've said, which is, you know, across the board immune support, to work with a practitioner for that. Relingering symptoms, are you contagious at that point? No, typically not. You're usually contagious in the first few days to week of your infection, but if you've been sick, but you're, you know, weeks ago and you're still coughing, you're not contagious at that point. Lots of people miss the bone broth recipe. Did I put a recipe in the handout? I don't think I did. Sorry. I feel like I'm going to have to stick a bone broth recipe in the handout next time. How much vitamin D and D3 and K2 should I take for my osteoporosis condition? Well, I can't provide specific prescriptions, you know, in a webinar format, but I can tell you that most clinical trials with vitamin K2 are using 180 micrograms, let's say 200 micrograms for easy math, of vitamin K2 per day in the MK7 form, with 1,000 IUs of vitamin D. Is there a vegetarian version to bone broth? No, I mean, just, you know, like a vegetable soup, you could stew up a bunch of veggies without the bones in it. First sign of cold and flu. Oh, listing. Oh, we're looking at Simcoe. It's not listed. Oh, I'm sorry. But now we're trying to list all of the stores that were participating. So just so you're aware, the Natural Factors products and Whole Earth and Sea products that I mentioned today are found at most health food stores. The participating retailers here are ones that were actively involved in the presentation, but not everybody got their names in on time. So some, unfortunately, stores may be missing off of this list. If so, we do apologize for that. So, okay, vegetarian version of bone broth, we covered that. First sign of cold and flu, how much echinacea or black elderberry should we take? So with the products that I showed you, the black elderberry soft gel capsules, you'd be looking at 2 of those per day. And same thing actually with the soft gels for the antiviral, 2 of those per day, or liquid 2 dropper fulls. It's a squeezy dropper that you can put in some water. Is there a harm in too much vitamin C? Vitamin C is water soluble. If you take too much, it may, a standard vitamin C may give you like loose stools. The buffered vitamin C won't do that, but it is water soluble and will simply, be eliminated from the body. So you really can't overdose on vitamin C. And again, not to say that you should be taking extra high amounts. How much is optimal? It depends on the individual. If you think you're coming down with something, you could be taking 1,000 milligrams a couple times a day even. Okay, and I think that is, we're right at time. We're actually a minute over time, and that's all the questions I have for today. Remember that you can still download the handout. It will also come attached to tomorrow's email with a recording of the presentation. And thanks everyone for your attention and your questions. You've been a great audience. Take care and stay healthy this winter.